Thank you very much, everybody, for coming to my talk today. Thank you very much to the IET for inviting me to give this talk. And thank you for the introduction. So essentially what I'm interested in, what I'm going to talk to you about today is this idea of vertical farming, ditching soil to save the world. So the actor in me and the theatrical nature gave it this very extreme and exciting title. So I'm going to start with the sort of doom and gloom. I do apologise, we'll get it out of the way quickly. Globally, we've got a problem. Fossil fuels are running out, and using them has really bad consequences. We have an increasing population, so more mouths to feed, more energy required. Anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions are increasing, so not only through energy production, but also through things like manufacturing and consumption. And we have emissions from land use change, which is a really major driver of these greenhouse gas emissions. And those things are leading to not great consequences. So we have a global rise in temperature. We're already over 1 degree C, unfortunately. We have more extreme weather events. So we've recently had the massive heat wave here in the UK. We also are seeing things like the devastating floods in Pakistan. And we are also seeing impacts on biodiversity. We all know we've just been through a pandemic where the impacts of human activity on natural ecosystems lead to devastating consequences. So we have a really big challenge on our hands. We need more energy and more food for more people, so 9 billion by 2050, with less environmental impact. So we have a real big challenge on our hands. This little graph up the top is to do with how much remaining fossil fuel reserves we have. We still have a fair amount left, but we really shouldn't use it, because if we do, we are accelerating ourselves towards that global warming target. So we need to look at alternative ways of doing things, and innovation and technology is one way we could potentially do that. So vertical farming is a really kind of sexy term, I'm going to say, but it kind of is a word that's used to encompass a lot of different things. So this is a great figure from a paper which explains the different types of agriculture that we see, cultivation in urban spaces, vertical farming, which is this use of the vertical space, as well as things like rooftop gardens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work through some of those and explain how they work, and then get on to this idea of maybe where bioenergy comes in. So first we have outdoor urban agriculture. So this is things such as rooftop farms. Rooftop farming is kind of what it says on the tin. It's growing stuff on roofs. It's a great use of underutilised space. It's really efficient for growing because you don't have to worry about things like shading or intervention, people coming in sort of nicking your plants. However, it's not suitable for all spaces. And Brooklyn Grange is a fantastic example. So they are the largest rooftop farm in the world. They're based in New York City. And as you can see, there are some photos there. They're absolutely massive. So they operate as a produce generator. They make food and sell it to local communities. We've also got community gardens. So these are both gardens in the sense of maybe allotments, food production spaces, or even just green spaces within cities that offer a place for people to get together. They are great because in terms of biodiversity, for example, they are great for community and bringing people together, but they do unfortunately have some negative impacts. So New York, again, as an example, just because I was out there for New York Ag Tech Week a few years ago, they are seeing a real problem with gentrification. So when one of these gardens gets put in with all the best intentions to bring the community together, it puts the rent up. It makes the property more expensive. So we're seeing this sort of negative feedback loop of the people who it's supposed to benefit, unfortunately don't see those come to fruition. So what are the different benefits of these systems? Sorry, again, New York example, but if anybody's ever been to New York, or you may or may not know, they have what's called a combined sewer system. So when it rains, this drainage system can get overloaded. And what happens is when it gets overloaded, to prevent flooding back up into the streets, we have water discharged into natural ecosystems, which is obviously not great for the environment. You're thinking essentially human waste and wastewater going out into nature. 70% of New York is paved. So this is a real big problem. There's no vegetation to suck up all the water that's coming down. But what these spaces can do, both rooftop gardens and community gardens, is offer sort of a buffer to slow things down. And Brooklyn Grange, they reckon that their sites across New York can hold over 2.5 inches of rain. That's a lot of water. And the way that it works, instead of coming down and flowing out into the rivers, the flow is slowed. So the water gets sucked up into the soil, and the drains are not overwhelmed, essentially. And it's the same at street level. So putting in community gardens, putting in more green space can help with storm water management. And given we're moving towards more extreme events, this type of infrastructure is really important. We also have the urban heat island effect. So this is the effect where in urban spaces the temperature is normally about 1 to 2 degrees hotter than surrounding areas. That is to do with the fact that we have lots of black space, lots of sort of enclosed spaces, and all the heat that comes down gets absorbed into the city. When you put plants into that space, you increase the albedo, so you change the reflectivity of the surface, so more of the radiation gets chucked back out, so you reduce that heating. What happens at the same time is that these plants, they undergo evapotranspiration. So the plants themselves release water from their pores, from their stomata, and that water then enters into our atmosphere and creates this local cooling effect. So greening, again, the cities is really important for reducing temperatures. It also adds to societal cohesion. So this is a few pictures from Brooklyn Grange. It's a beautiful site, I've visited it. People get married there. So there are other benefits to creating these spaces for people to engage sort of on a social level, but also with their food. So people go and visit very regularly these sites to see how things are grown, and that's a great education program. But will it actually deliver? So this is the kind of crux of the question. We currently have, traditional field agriculture, and I think there is some press that says that kind of these new technologies, urban farming, controlled environment agriculture, will be the solution. So this is kind of what we're trying to address here, is will it actually deliver? So the answer kind of is no, essentially is no. It can help, it can create local food, but the amount of food produced is just not large enough to meet the needs of the city. Urban spaces are really highly populated, so you have a lot of people in not a lot of space. And all of that land comes at a premium. So you're not only trying to grow food on very expensive space, you are competing with the needs of others. So you need people to have somewhere to live. So saying, well, I want to put a garden there, oftentimes doesn't come off. So in highly populated cities, these are a few different studies, in highly populated cities, it didn't really do as well because essentially there's not enough space. But in less populated cities, it can do a reasonable level of supply. So somewhere like Detroit, they reckon about 65% of fresh vegetables. That's pretty good. In Ohio, if they looked at filling a lot of the space that is available, they could potentially meet up to 100% of that need. So that's really positive. But if you look at total consumption down the bottom, it's quite a small proportion. So, yes, as I said, it most likely won't contribute significantly to food security. However, there are so many subsidiary benefits, so it's not something that should be discounted. We shouldn't say, well, just because it doesn't feed people, we'll get rid of it. It provides other benefits to the city. So things like biodiversity, things like community building, reducing that heat island effect. You can kind of do two things at once. Instead of just building a park or planting some greenery, you might as well make some food at the same time and let people engage with their food system. We also have mental health, so that's a really big part of it. There are countless studies that show engaging in green space, being in nature, really improves your mental health. So again, having more greenery in cities can really help do that. And finally, we can improve the soil of the health in those cities. So urban soils tend to be fairly degraded. By cultivating them and taking care of them, you can increase soil health, which increases soil carbon, which is great for the environment. So now I'm going to come on to indoor urban agriculture. So we're getting a bit more techy now. So controlled environment agriculture is a term which broadly encompasses all of this type of agriculture. It's essentially cultivation in any space where you have a level of control. It doesn't have to be total control, it can be partial control, like a glass house. So in a glass house, you have a level of control over the environment you're exposing your plants to. But you can have systems where your control is total. So you can adjust the temperature, you can adjust the humidity, CO2 enrichment is possible, ventilation, those sorts of things. So you can create a completely artificial environment for these plants to be reared in. And very oftentimes they are soilless. So these are things like hydroponics, aeroponics and aquaponics, each of which I'm about to explain. So just before we get onto that, so when does controlled environment agriculture become vertical farming? Basically, when you take advantage of that vertical plane. So any time where you go from being a single layer of horizontal farming into the vertical, you have vertical farming. And it's often done in a variety of different ways. You can see down here, this is a sort of stacking. So you'll have a layer of plants, and then a layer of lights, and then a layer of plants, a layer of lights. You stack upwards like that. Very handily, the props bought by Zero out in the lobby, if you've seen it, that is more what we'd call sort of pure vertical. So that is cultivating sort of straight up. And that you can see in the system there on the end, where you essentially have towers that go up, and then you irrigate them from the top, water comes down. So there are two sort of different ways. They have pros and cons. It's mostly to do with operation. So these are a lot easier to operate from a sort of person perspective. Those can be a bit cumbersome to move about because they are pretty big. And it almost always happens indoors. The reason for this is lighting conditions. So it is possible to have these systems outdoors. There's a nice example there. But the problem is, as soon as you get into any stacking or any vertical configuration, the light getting to your plants is not optimal. So generally they are in a controlled environment where supplementary lighting is used. So now I'm going to talk about water and nutrient delivery systems. So my assumption was a lot of people are engineers, so I was going for kind of the techie side of things. So the water and nutrient delivery systems is the way in which water and nutrients get to the plants. We don't have any soil, so often what's used are these inert mediums. So there are some examples here of different root plugs. The reason that we use these is it's just a place for you to germinate a seed and then for your roots to be grown out of there. It is possible to also not use a medium at all, which I'll show you at the end. So there are several different types of hydroponics. They all operate in sort of the same theory. You are providing water to the roots in a fairly you're providing water to the roots in a continuous manner. So the ones on my left, your right, the ones on the left here are not very common in commercial operations, whereas the ones on this side are commercially more common. So the most basic system you can create is a wick system, no power, no electricity, completely passive. Or you have a drip system, which is how we do field agriculture. So this is just a line of drip irrigators, and water is pumped into these irrigation lines and it just sort of drips water slowly into the pots. The ones on this side are much more commercially common, so deep water culture. This is where you suspend your plants on a sort of piece of plastic or a piece of foam, and they're just dipped and they just sit in the water sort of all the time. You also have flood and drain, or ebb and flow. This is where water is pumped up into the plants, and then it drains back via gravity. And then finally you have nutrient film technique. This is where you have a constant flow of water, always running past the roots. And kind of the speed of which they each grow. Deep water culture is sort of in third place, and the flood and drain is a little bit faster. The nutrient film technique is slightly quicker than that. And that's just because of how much air is getting to these roots. That's kind of the main reason why you see that. But generally these will perform fairly similarly in a commercial system. So as I said, they are the most commonly used commercial system in terms of soilless cultivation. So if you go to visit a vertical farm, it's very likely that they will be using hydroponics. The reason for that is it's very cheap, it's very easy to set up, and it's very low risk. So if your pump fails, your crops are still sitting normally in some amount of water. They're not fully exposed in terms of their root mass, and we'll get onto why that's a problem in a second. This is the live fast, die young approach. So aeroponics are your sort of Ferrari race car of how to grow stuff. This is the fastest way to grow stuff. It's amazing, it's my favourite. But it's crazy risky because if your pump fails, these are your roots. They're just hanging out in the air. If you don't have any water getting to them, very quickly, those plants are going to wilt and they're going to die. Especially in a system where you have lights. So where you have lights, and if you lose your water, you lose your irrigation, you basically cook your plants really quickly. But the great advantage is that they grow really fast. The reason for that is because of how the nutrients are delivered. So they're delivered through an aerosol mist. So water is pumped at high pressure through tiny nozzles, and the water spritzes. So something, think about something like your shower, for example. And that happens on a sort of a timer, a semi-regular basis. And the reason it's so fast is to do with the aeration of the roots. So giving the roots loads of air allows them to take up the nutrients in a more optimal way. And there's lots of sort of complicated aerosol chemistry that goes into the best way to do that. But essentially what happens is the roots have a point at which you want to get them sort of really dry. And then once they're sort of at that point of perfect dryness, not too dry, but just a little bit dry, you then hit them again with the mist, and they're able to take up the nutrients much faster. So there's kind of lots of optimization, lots of tinkering that goes into getting these systems just right. And so what I want to do is show you a video, some of you may have heard of. They are a world-leading aeroponics company that we're working with, and they've developed a really novel way of delivering aeroponics. So I just want to show you this because they explain it better than I do.
How do you grow plants with sound? In nature, plants mostly get their energy from the sun, carbon from the air, and absorb water, oxygen, and nutrients through their roots in the soil. At Let Us Grow, we use an indoor growing method called aeroponics, which doesn't use soil. Instead, we feed plant roots with a fine mist. This delivers all the nutrients and water the plant needs, while providing access to important atmospheric gases, such as oxygen, which lets the roots breathe. This makes roots healthier and stronger, which helps plants to grow faster than in other indoor farming methods. At Let Us Grow, we create this mist using ultrasonics, sound waves that vibrate at frequencies over 20 kHz, well above the range of human hearing. This is an atomizer. We use it to produce these high-frequency sound waves and create ripples in nutrient-rich water. At ultrasonic frequencies, when we make these ripples big enough, the water disperses and breaks into droplets, similar to a breaking wave. These droplets rise up to the surface and become the mist that feeds our plant roots. Creating mist in this way allows for very precise control, so we can give the plant exactly what it needs. This means that growers can maximize yields and have more harvests in a year. Compared to other growing methods, aeroponics also uses far less water, reduces fertilizer runoff, and needs no pesticides. So it's better for the planet too. Our atomizers can be used in a variety of growing setups, from small vertical farming systems like container farms to larger commercial greenhouses or indoor farms. By using aeroponics and growing with sound, we can grow more food all over the world using fewer resources and with far less impact on the planet.
So as I said, it's very fast growth rates, but it is fairly risky, and you do have that energy usage within the system because you are running these pumps. So finally, I'm going to come on to aquaponics. So aquaponics is the integration of using fish and fish waste as a nutrient source. So instead of using a chemical fertilizer, you use the organic waste that the fish are producing, basically fish poo. So we have aquaculture, which is using the nutrients in sort of a separate way, but aquaponics is when you introduce it in this kind of hydroponic type environment. You have two main ways of doing this: coupled systems, so as you can see here, the plants are just sort of sitting in the tank, the fish are going about their business, and the plants are being fed. This isn't very commercially common, mainly because fish like to feed on roots, so they end up eating your roots of your plants, which you obviously don't want. But what does work really well are these decoupled systems. So having a system where you have your fish underneath, and then you have a pump taking that water up into your growing space for your plants. And there is commercial potential, I would say. It is a shortened supply chain, so the same way in which you have local produce for your plants, you also have that for your fish. And you do have a diversified income stream. So you're not just relying on growing these plants, which demand may peak and wave, but you also have fish as a means of sale. And there are some very promising ways, very high income value streams, such as things like sturgeon, because sturgeon make caviar, which is a very premium product. But it is fairly commercially challenging. There are not many very successful aquaponic businesses because of all the challenges that come with it. You need permits for livestock, so not everybody can just set one up in their backyard. You have a duty of care to these fish. You have to rear them in a specific way. You have different regulations with respect to food safety because of the fish in the system. Balancing the nutrients is really challenging, so you have to work out, well, how much food do I need to give the fish so they make the right amount of poo and the right quality of poo that will then feed my plants really efficiently. Fish health and fish illness is a real big issue, so if you suddenly have an infection of some sort happen in your system, you might have to get rid of your fish, and then you're suddenly back to, well, how do I feed my plants? And regulating water temperature is, again, a real big challenge. Anyone who's ever had a fish tank, and I used to have a fish tank, may know it's very hard to manage. If you don't keep on top of it, it can be quite challenging. So that's aquaponics. So let's talk about commercial operations. So we've spoken about how we deliver nutrients. What happens when we put that together with our controlled environment? So there are about 3 different commercial outfits that currently exist. The first one is farmers or produce generators. So these are people who are making crops. They're making salad bowls, they're selling lettuces to supermarkets and to local businesses. Plenty, who some of you may have heard of, they are the largest incumbent in this space. They sort of started it all and have got massive investment, hundreds of millions of pounds worth, including by Jeff Bezos. So they are really successful in their business and business model, and they are going towards the really high automation. So massively big scale, really heavy on the automation. And they are very successful. I'll show you a video in a second of what they do. We also have growing underground, which again some of you may know of. This is in London. This is kind of novel because they are growing in the tunnels under London. And again, they make produce, so they sell to local restaurants different sort of herbs and leafy greens. We then have this category of technology suppliers. So they're not interested in selling produce, they're interested in making the tech. So Let Us Grow, you saw the video of who we work with. They've got these fantastic atomizers, these ultrasonic ways of delivering nutrients. They also offer container farms, so these containers, these shipping containers you can buy, you can kit them out with this kit, and you can just start a farm. It's a very viable business model. And there are other suppliers, so Freight Farms, they're a North American business. That's a picture you can see inside the farm, so you can see they're making use of this vertical space, and then they have artificial lighting up against it, so similar to what you've got going here. So what I'm going to do, the next one is a video. This is called Tigris, or Tigris, I think is how you pronounce it. This is Plenty's automation robot. So this is just a short video so you can see it in action. So you can see there how much was automated. The seed delivery was automated, the initial propagation was automated, and and all those robot arms were moving everything about. You saw how tall those towers were. So they are going for the kind of the fully automated system, removing people from the picture. And then the third kind, sort of business model that we see that's commonly being used, are these retail micro farms. So has anybody seen one of these? Just out of interest, any hands up? Yeah, one in the back, excellent. So there are a couple of these in London for sure. They're in M&S's normally. There's also one in Selfridges. So if you're ever about, Clapham Junction has one, M&S, do go have a look. These are sort of little fridges, so they're small versions of a controlled environment. The idea is you go along, you open the fridge, you pick out the lettuce that you want to eat for dinner, you take it with you. So it's a nice idea. It's a way to engage the consumer with their food, but it is a bit gimmicky. Again, this system is not really going to address global food insecurity. We're not going to have these in replacement of sort of general agricultural supply. And there are issues with managing supply and demand. So being able to sort of plant out your little fridge, your little retail microfarm so it's full and it looks healthy versus people who are going to actually buy that is a big question. I expect what happens most often is you come in and go, oh, let's try it, and then you never buy it again because it's probably more expensive than buying it from elsewhere. And pest management is also a really big question. Because this is consumer facing, you cannot risk having pests in this system, because as soon as a customer comes up to it and sees pests, they will never go back to that little fridge again. So these are a really nice idea to sort of get consumers engaged, but I think there is a slight challenge in terms of managing them because they are consumer facing. So I'm going to move on now to kind of the benefits, potential benefits and potential drawbacks of these highly automated systems. So looking specifically at this indoor controlled environment agriculture. So it does reduce land footprint, we know that. Using a stacking or using vertical cultivation, you can grow anywhere between 5 to 10 times the amount of produce on the same amount of land. That is fantastic. That is a great thing. We also have decreased harvest cycles, so because we have the control in the system, we can have many more crops per year. So the example here, in a field, a lettuce will take about 80 days to get to harvestable size. In a controlled environment, it will take about 20, which again is fantastic. It allows us to really speed up this production. You do have reduced inputs, so you are using less water, less fertiliser, you generally don't need pesticides because you're not exposed to pests where you're in that controlled space. You can cultivate in harsh environments, so I don't know if anybody saw, there was recently a hosepipe ban. There was also a piece in the BBC about a vertical farming company who were talking about, well, we don't have to worry about hosepipe bans or droughts because we are in a controlled environment system. So we can sort of get around that in this space. Extreme weather events, no impact. And it is fully controlled, so there is the potential to manipulate crop quality. So what you can do is you can change your lighting, you can introduce stressors, which might increase the quality of your crop or change the expression of certain compounds. So things like herbs, which produce aromatics, those are often produced as a stress response. So you can apply a little bit of stress and make sort of really fragrant basil or really fragrant mint, which again really heightens that sensory experience when you eat it. And then I'd say there are some potential benefits. So speaking so there are sort of some people in this space who talk about food equality and this idea that moving food production into urban spaces will aid food equality because it addresses food desert. So in urban spaces, often due to poverty, people are not able to access the right nutrition that they need. I would question that because of how expensive these systems are. It's probably not going to do much for food equality, and we'll speak about that in the next slide. The reduced water footprint, I agree, they do use less water, but this is often a number that's kind of bandied about. Anywhere between 90 and 99% less water. If you go and speak to a vertical farming company or a hydroponics company, they will quote you this number. And when I was at New York Ag Week a few years ago, I did not make any friends because I kept asking them, where did this number come from? And they went, well, everyone knows it's 90% less. I said, but why? They didn't like that at all. So I'm really interested in where that number's come from. And I have a student of mine, Nicole, who's on sort of like a bloodhound on a hunt to find where this number has come from. Higher crop quality, so we potentially could have higher crop quality in these systems. However, there has been some consumer feedback that says it's not that tasty, it's a bit watery. So I think there is a question about getting that quality right. And finally, automation. Again, that's great for food safety and for sterile environments, but it really doesn't help us when we think about jobs, for example. There are several drawbacks. So it has a very high capex. So starting a business is really expensive because of that capital expenditure, the initial outlay. And then the operating costs are also really high. So not only do you have your electricity and your HVAC, which is your heating, ventilation and air conditioning, you also have your labour. And labour actually makes up a really large part of that operating cost because you need more highly skilled people in this space. Traditional agriculture relies on cheap migrant labour, essentially. Limited crop, and because of that, because it's so expensive, limited crops are profitable, which then in turn means that you have to sell your crops for a much higher price. So this is the question about food equality. The people who are going to be buying these are those who can afford to buy these crops. It's not going to be something for everyone. So there are sustainability questions that remain. Is it worth it? Will it actually deliver? So we do know that it definitely produces more on less land, more on the same amount of land, so that's fantastic. It does use less inputs, yes, but energy use is a big problem. But just so it's not all doom and gloom, we've done some sort of initial LCA modelling that basically shows if you decarbonise your grid, a lot of these problems go away overnight. So going towards sort of general decarbonisation or integrating the system with renewables will save a lot of those sort of headaches. And technology costs could decrease over time. So we saw with solar panels that real sort of steep reduction in price, same as happening with LED technologies. But will it ever aid food equality? Not sure. So now let's move on to the future of vertical farming. So we've got this great technology. To be honest, soilless cultivation is not new. It's been around for years and years and years. But the idea of kind of integrating it and using it now has become an option because it's got a lot cheaper, and the need, I guess, has sort of pushed us towards that technology. But there's loads that you can do with this system. So taking this idea of sort of using space efficiently, there's tons that you could do. So we know that we can grow food. I've put medicines, and we've got a picture there of a North American medicinal plant that people really enjoy engaging with. That does fantastically well in these systems. And actually there's been a study, it's a bit top-heavy, but there's been a study that looked at illegal marijuana growing, and they found that actually if we just legalised it and made them put them in these more efficient systems, the amount of greenhouse gases we would save would be astronomical. So that's maybe an argument for legalisation. Anyway, that's a question for another day. Insects are really easy to vertical farm, they're really easy to rear, so you basically put a load of food waste in a tray, insects love it, they grow up, insect protein maybe. And I've got animal products, very controversially. We maybe already do this with battery chickens. I know that's a bit of an image issue, but this is like a rendering of maybe this kind of stacked car park full of cows. Who knows? But in terms of access to agricultural provisions, I just want to make really clear that vertical farming and urban farming are not a silver bullet. They are not a solution to all of our problems. They are a fantastic technology that will complement what we already do. So we will always need field agriculture, we will always need imports, and there might be some other futuristic thing that we just don't know we have right now. So the thing I think that's going to make vertical farming take that step into the next sort of generation of being super efficient and being really legitimised is breeding. So up to this point, we have bred crops to exist outdoors, to be pest resistant, to be tall, to be hardy to wind, to be hardy to rain, that sort of thing, to not need lots of water. That's the opposite of what we need in a vertical farm. In a vertical farm, we're providing this fantastic, cushy, hotel-like environment. They've got everything they need. They can be pampered. We also want them to be really small so they can fit in a really compact space. So breeding is going to basically make the step change and make this sort of make or break this technology. And there are lots of ways that we can change crops. So most people know about traditional breeding. You take two crops, cross them and hope for the best. We have GMOs, which again have a bit of an image issue. It's a fantastic technology that absolutely works, but people are really not accepting of it, so it's not really a track we can go down. But we do have CRISPR-Cas editing, which is this new genome editing technique. which doesn't have any foreign introductions and is gaining speed for being really efficient at modifying these crops, and hopefully won't have the same PR issues that GMOs do. And work has been done already in this space. So this is a paper that came out in 2019 where they were looking at exactly that. So what do we need to do to a plant? How do we need to modify it to make it work in vertical farming? And as you can see with tomatoes, they've been very successful. So the natural wild type is on this side, and then on that side is how they've edited it. So they've gone from having this really tall crop to a very sort of stocky little crop. We also have inflorescences, so the sort of branching of the tomato fruits themselves are much tighter together. So this is fantastic, but what on earth does that have to do with any of this? So as I mentioned at the start, we've got a problem. We've got all of these bad things are happening, and I would argue that bioenergy can help solve all of them. And I'm going to try and convince you of that very quickly. So the fantastic thing about bioenergy is that it delivers two birds with one stone. So this is the carbon cycle. Some of you might be familiar with this. What happens when you grow plants is they fix carbon. So they take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the plant biomass and also into the soil. So you have this pull down from the atmosphere down into your plants. What this does is it offsets, by using bioenergy, we offset fossil fuels. So we use less fossil fuels. So we can make this outward arrow a little bit smaller by using bioenergy. And what we can also do with certain types of bioenergy, so second generation dedicated crops, we can have positive impacts on land. So certain transitions from normally arable or grassland, not all grasses are the same, but a sort of a general transition from a low quality land into a bioenergy crop increases carbon stocking and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So we can tackle that part of the carbon cycle too. And what happens now when you burn the bioenergy is anything that was captured during its growth is released, but you end up with a net zero, because you've captured all the carbon and then you've burnt it, but it's fine to burn it because we've already taken it out of the atmosphere. You end up with zero. When you add CCS, which is carbon capture and storage, so you catch the carbon coming out of the chimney and you put it down into a geological reservoir, you end up with net negative. That's a really big deal. This is one of the only natural sort of esque technologies that we can do now, we've been doing for millions of years, that can do this. It's fantastic. And the reason it's so important is because the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they do lots of modelling. They figure out how on earth we're going to get down to keep limiting warming to 2 degrees. They've done loads of modelling. And 100 out of 116 scenarios that keep us within our warming limit rely on BECCS. BECCS is absolutely essential. Bioenergy with carbon capture and storage is an absolute necessity. So we really have to do this. We have to get bioenergy on the agenda. I'm coming to why this is linked to vertical farming in a second. So to do that, we need loads of bioenergy, which means we need to plant lots more trees. And unfortunately, we currently have a land area globally about the size of Egypt. But based on those predictions, what the IPCC want us to get to is somewhere between the size of Argentina and Australia. So 3 to 7 times the amount of land to be planted. That is a really, really big challenge. This is our low overshoot scenario. So this is if we all behave ourselves, we have lots of behavioural change, if we stop eating meat, if we don't drive sort of polluting vehicles, we reduce our greenhouse gases, we can have this great positive scenario, just the size of Argentina. But if we don't do that and we're really slow about it, we've got to go for Australia. That's a massive amount of land. And when we put that into a UK context, in the UK we have acknowledged that it's absolutely essential to have bioenergy. This is our key figure here. We have to go from 10,000 hectares that we currently have to 720,000 hectares by 2050. That is a lot of land planted in not a lot of time. And so, as Nigel mentioned earlier, this is my key research interest: how we use land to provide food and energy whilst minimising environmental impacts. This is what I mentioned earlier about these transitions. So what I'm now proposing, which I definitely wouldn't have proposed about 10 years ago, was that maybe we should be looking at transitioning from damaging arable agriculture into bioenergy crops. That is not a popular statement because we have this food versus fuel dilemma. However, doing it in the right way and not removing those food provisions is possible. That's where we come to vertical farming. So, I have two proposals. One is land sparing. So, I propose taking a field of lettuce, which we use 10 centimetres of, and we put that into a vertical farm because we know we can grow them there really, really well. We know it's profitable, we know it's quicker, we know we can do it on less land. And you spare that land for something else. So don't just use 10 centimetres of your land, use much more of it. We then potentially will plant bioenergy and we'll have a global wet supply. We know there are questions about if this is sustainable, and we are working on that. So I have two PhD students who are looking at the land sparing benefits and also the sustainability of those systems. So we're trying to answer those questions. The second option is bioenergy supply, and this is where things get crazy. So my proposition is we don't only grow it in the fields, but we also make use of this really quick technology to help us get more of it into the field quicker. So the proposition is not to grow trees in these systems because we know they're high energy intensive, but we use this to essentially do the nursery stage, to grow them up quickly so we can then get them out into a field even quicker. And again, you're always aiming towards this global wet supply. And I propose that it could be a game changer because we don't have time. We don't have time to not do this now. We have to have solutions. So this is where sort of my new big project comes in. So this is a really exciting innovation project that we're leading here at Surrey. It's a £4 million innovation project funded out of the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. What we are proposing is to take a technology, you can see here on the left. This is an aeroponics system. And we want to develop this system for bioenergy crops so that we can multiply them quickly. So we grow them up in about sort of 27 weeks, then we plant them out into the field. And the idea is that kind of as a business model, which obviously businesses will go mad at this, we want to put ourselves out of business. We want to create so much biomass so quickly, fill up the land, start sequestering carbon, that we no longer need to do this. That's the kind of ideal thing. So we just want to get a problem solved. And we're looking to demonstrate essentially that this technology works and look at how we can apply it to other crops. And just on the side there, we've done preliminary trials, so we do know it works, and we saw fantastic gains. So compared to soil, we found it was 25% faster, we had double the above ground biomass, 3 times fewer roots, and we had a much higher planting density. So we know we've got the speed there. So we only started this about 3 months ago, 4 months ago, this project. And there are some things that we know so far. So we know that there is a gap in the market for this technology. So the controlled environment ag people who grow the lettuce indoors really want to be able to grow bigger things. But it's difficult at this point. So we're going to hoping to use this funding to develop that system, to give that back to the market. We know there's a bottleneck in supply. So here in the UK, there is not enough biomass feedstock to get us to our planting target. Doing so will take a really long time, and we can't rely on imports. So importing this feedstock has got really challenging. And there is also a problem for nursery trees. So as well as our bioenergy targets and our climate reduction targets, we also are aiming to a forest. We want to plant trees all over the UK, and there are not enough nursery trees. There's a real problem in the UK, so we want to help sort of solve that problem too. Technical challenges do exist. We are going into the unknown. This is a picture here of one of our wonderful failures. We have the roots completely blocking our drain. We are solving that as we speak. But we are taking this kind of idea of fail early, fail often, but fail forward. So we're not coming into this saying, oh, we've got this amazing technology. We've got something and it keeps breaking. We're figuring it out as part of an innovation project. But it's really exciting. And we are seeing genotypic and environmental differences. So we have different varieties planted in our system. Some of them are really enjoying the experience, some of them aren't. And that's interesting. So what is it about those plants that thrive in these systems? And also the environment. So we have a polytunnel type setup and a glasshouse setup. And they are responding differently. We have different expressions in those spaces. And we can grow this stuff really fast. Typical field crop that would be planted about the same age as our current stock would be about 60 centimetres. We are well over 3 metres at this point. So we know that it is working. It's fantastic. And things to stay tuned for. So if you're interested in following this project, we are launching our brand and launching our website fairly soon. It's not quite ready. We are doing a full environmental and socio-economic assessment because we are well aware of the consequences of using this type of agriculture. I can't sort of do an entire lecture saying, well, they use too much energy and then go do it myself. So we are aware we need to quantify that and minimise those impacts as much as we can. We're working with key delivery partners to have a commercial system, so let us grow. Those amazing Aeroponics people, they are working with us, so we are really confident that we're going to have fantastic technology at the end of this. We are exploring other crops, so as I mentioned, forestry. We're looking at how we can help that industry as well. We will look at how they perform in the field. That's a really key portion. So when we grow it in this system, will it work when we put it outside? That's something we really need to make sure is stable. And we're looking to accelerate breeding programs. So breeding is another big part of this idea. I spoke about breeding. We want to use our technology to help them go faster. So by putting their plants into our system, we can express those traits quicker so they can see whether they've had successful crosses, for example. And because you're a room full of engineers, if any of this sounds interesting, come and play with us. So we're always looking for new ways to work together and have new views and sort of insights on our work. So please do feel free to come and speak to us about that. So let's go back to my controversial first question. Can we ditch soil to save the world? So I'm sorry if I got you here on a false premise, but no, we probably can't. Soil is fantastic. Soil is amazing. I started off playing with soil before I got into the soilless game. But we can use technology to let us make better use of the soil we do have. So using technology and integrating that with other solutions such as bioenergy is a fantastic way to go. And then just a couple of summary slides. This is a bit teachery, this bit. So there are lots of different types of urban ag. Outdoor farming probably isn't going to deliver loads of food, but does deliver loads of other benefits. Indoor farming is expensive and not so green right now, but has real potential to deliver if we can decarbonise it. But we do have questions about sustainability, affordability, and equality. Urban agriculture has benefits beyond itself, so thinking about integrating these technologies and the impacts they can have, the knock-on effects, is really important. It can supply more than just leafy greens, and that's what we're trying to prove in our system. Breeding is going to play a massive, massive role, and it's not a silver bullet, so please don't go away thinking that. Last slide. I just want to say anything is possible when you have the right people there to support you. So this is by no means my work, this is our work. These are fantastic people who I work with, and I couldn't have done it without them, so I must do a shout out to them. And yeah, just to say thank you very much for listening.